Stories Philippines podcast.
A shadow lingers in every corner of this episode, and the stories within carry images and emotions that some may find truly harrowing. For those who choose to listen, consider this a gentle warning. What follows may disturb you at your core. Listen only if you are ready. Imagine yourself in the late 1990s, stepping away from city heat into the darkness of a Manila cinema. Outside, the streets thrum with jeepneys and vendors, but inside it is cool. A sharp contrast, a welcome escape. The air carries that sharp mix of popcorn, cleaning alcohol, and something else. A sour, old velvet scent that always seems out of place. The anticipation is thick. Around you, the seats fill quietly with strangers. Each is there for their own reasons. Some to laugh, some to cry, and, for a few, perhaps to forget the world outside for an hour or two. But not all who enter these theaters are alive, and not all leave unchanged. I am Jessica, and you are listening to Stories Philippines, Podcast Season 4, Episode 4. Progress has a way of rewriting landscapes. Manila, in the 1980s and 90s, was a city on the edge of transformation, its soul still tied to sprawling Spanish colonial streets like Escolta and Avenida. This was an era when movie theaters stood like cathedrals of memory, silent witnesses to joy, sorrow, and the soft violence of time. The old cinemas, decades old, each had stories. Some whispered, some shouted, some simply felt on solitary nights when the house lights went out. Escolta, once Manila's shimmering crown, held majestic halls. The Clover, the Liwayway, and the Grand Metropolitan. The Met, with its Art Deco flourishes and soaring ceilings, could swallow sound and amplify fear. Long before ghost stories made headlines, projectionists whispered of cold spots and late-night footsteps, of women in long skirts seen passing through solid walls when nobody else was there. A story passed around the Met lingered for decades. Theater workers spoke of a young woman murdered during a stormy July evening in the 1960s or 70s. Her attacker never caught. After her death, things changed. Ushers refused to close up alone. Sometimes, faint singing would float near the dark projection booth, long after the reel had stopped spinning. At times, audience members would feel a gentle tug at their sleeves, only to turn and find the seat behind them empty. A chill would spread through the row, and nobody spoke until the credits rolled. But death in Manila's theaters was never a singular event. The city's past ensured that tragedy visited often. Stories told of moviegoers fainting during horror marathons, only to be found dead in their seats before anyone realized. Once, in a theater along Quiapo, a man walked out mid-feature, ashen and trembling, certain he had heard his dead father's voice calling from the back rows. With the dawn of the 1990s, the urban landscape itself shifted. Vast cinemal complexes rose from once-forgotten corners of the city. Older theaters crumbled, their ghosts supposedly migrating to new venues or else locked away in rooms marked staff only. Mall theaters felt different, brighter, shinier, and far less personal. But fear was not to be outdone by fluorescent lighting. By 2005, a new cultural fear gripped the city. A legend of malice and disease passed hand to hand in the movie house darkness. It was the era of the compact disc and the pirated video on every corner. Piracy flourished, the old industry struggled, and the youth spent countless lazy afternoons hiding from parental eyes in the cavernous cinemalls. Mothers whispered warnings to their children: never wear shorts or short sleeves in the movie theater, and never ever sit in the back row. The reason? A story passed from schoolyard to internet forum, from a listener-submitted tale to YouTube short. If you were careless, a stranger could prick your skin with a needle. That needle, the legend said, was tainted with HIV. The fear was everywhere, but the evidence was nowhere. Newspaper columns investigated, no reported cases, just rumors and familiar secondhand horror. Still, stories gathered. Students who claimed a friend's cousin felt a jab in Alabang. Teenagers who confessed to checking their arms for weeks after a matinee in Cubao. Some blamed revenge, some dark ritual, some simply the decay of manners in modern times. On Facebook and in online forums, dozens shared friend of a friend stories. Shadowy men with hollow cheeks, a sudden prick, the shadow fleeing through the aisle and vanishing. In reality, the tale mirrored a global panic, echoing through America, the United Kingdom, France, and even South Asia over the last 2 decades. Always the same. A villain in the darkness, spreading a modern plague in a place meant for escape. The phenomenon showed something deeper. Why did these legends take root at that time? Perhaps because cinemas in Manila were transforming from grand neighborhood icons to anonymous corporate spaces. Crowds replaced community. People no longer trusted strangers in the dark. Piracy, too, rewrote the city's relationship with film. The romance of the shared theater experience faded as bootleg discs allowed safe, solitary viewing at home. The thriving black market thrived on the very fear that haunted the malls, the fear that a trip to the movies could bring you home touched by more than a story. Not all ghosts are legends. Some were witnessed and submitted firsthand. A young woman recalled a midnight show in the 90s when, as seats emptied, she distinctly saw a man stand up from the farthest row and walk into the wall. Another, a staffer at a mall theater in Quezon City, reported mysterious tickets sold every afternoon to seats that always remained empty. Yet after the show, the seat cushions looked pressed when checked. And then there was the theater itself, a character as complex as any haunting. The Manila Film Center, perhaps the city's most notorious site, began as a monument to progress. In 1981, an accident trapped dozens of construction workers beneath wet cement. Despite attempts to recover their bodies, many remained entombed within the building's foundations. Stories grew of strange moaning from theater walls, of chill winds in empty corridors, and of shadows shifting behind the stage lights. The government eventually tried to cleanse the space by inviting spirit communicators, priests, and even exorcists. Yet the suffering seemed trapped in the architecture, proof that not every wound can be covered by fresh paint and bright lights. Paranormal investigators, modern-day spirit questers, visited the site in the early 2000s, capturing unexplained sounds and light phenomena. Some felt nausea, chills, or sudden panic. Old employees insisted. The air smelled different, metallic and sweet like blood and old plaster, every November when All Saints' Day approached. Other theaters had their legends. The angry child ghost of Baguio's old movie house, said to send chills down the spines of projectionists. The faceless figure wandering Robinson's Galleria's basement corridors. The floating woman glimpsed gliding across empty seats in Makati. Each story felt personal, colored by local superstition and global anxiety. But reflection washes over every episode of mass hysteria. How do these stories shape us? Why do they linger? Unconfirmed but impossible to forget. They show how we process fear, how we try to control chaos with stories. In Manila's movie theaters, the darkness is never absolute. The past flickers alongside the film on the screen, old sorrows and anxieties hidden just behind the dialogue and the music. Today, malls still rise. VCDs have faded, but the ghosts remain. Some are memories, some are warnings. Some are just the shadows we cast when the reels begin to spin. And so, the question remains. When you sit down in the cool dimness, popcorn in hand and credits rolling, are you truly alone? The fear of the infected needle, though lacking any solid proof, was a perfect example of a societal anxiety externalized and given a terrifying face. This phenomenon of modern folklore has international parallels that stretch back centuries. Across Europe in the Middle Ages, rumors of well poisoning spread during times of plague, pinning the blame for sickness on marginalized groups. The common thread is the need to explain the unexplainable, to assign a deliberate malice to a random, overwhelming tragedy like disease. For Manila in the early 2000s, HIV was a terrifying, little understood illness, and the anonymous, crowded space of the movie theater became the perfect stage for this dark urban legend. It was a safe horror because it was not real, yet it offered a palpable way for people to discuss the very real fear of the epidemic spreading across the globe, reaching from the United States to Southeast Asia. The architectural history of Manila's theaters adds another dark layer. Consider the majestic theater on Azcárraga, now Recto Avenue. It opened in the 1930s, a beacon of pre-war glamour. Yet, it stood through the horrors of the Second World War. The walls of these old buildings absorbed not just the cheers of happy crowds, but also the silent trauma of occupation and subsequent liberation. Manila, having been nearly destroyed, is a city built atop layers of violence and unsettled spirits. These older theaters, with their deep foundations and their proximity to old mass grave sites or battlegrounds, became natural conductors for restless energy. The smell of old velvet Paul mentioned, that sour, old scent, is often described by sensitive people as the smell of stale energy, the accumulation of decades of intense human emotion, fear, grief, and sometimes sudden death. A retired projectionist named Danilo, who worked the reels at a former Escolta cinema until its closing in 2006, submitted his own testimony. He described a recurring shadow on the upper balcony, a shape that never quite materialized into a person, but always appeared when the film being shown was a period drama or a classic Tagalog film from the 1950s. Danilo, a man of simple, devout faith, believed these were the spirits of those who loved the cinema so purely that their souls refused to leave when the building was condemned. He never saw the shadow during an action movie or a comedy, only when a genuine piece of the past flickered on the screen. He saw it as a silent, nostalgic audience, perhaps less sinister than the malevolent figures of modern legend, but unsettling nonetheless. This interpretation, that ghosts are not all angry but simply lingering, sad memories, offers a different lens. It suggests a profound cultural connection where the physical space of the cinema is a sacred ground for shared memory and historical reflection. The theological perspective in the Philippines often integrates these phenomena into a worldview where the spirit realm is constantly overlapping with the physical. Priests, especially those in the older, Spanish-era churches near the cinemas, have always had to contend with the local belief in the encanto and the maligno, not just the Western concept of the simple ghost. The hauntings of the Manila Film Center, for instance, were approached not just as individual ghosts, but as a mass of collective, unquiet energy, a lugar na pinamumugaran ang nasasamang espiritu, or a place that breeds evil spirits. The official attempts at cleansing the film center, which included masses and prayer vigils, were an attempt to impose a formal, organized spiritual control over a chaos that was fundamentally primal and historical. In this view, the needle prick rumors and the spectral sightings in the dark are simply different manifestations of the same spiritual reality, that evil, whether historical or modern, seeks a conduit, and a place designed for darkness, like a theater, provides the perfect environment. Think of the physical experience of sitting in a theater. Your senses are intentionally dulled to the outside world. The lights are extinguished, cutting off sight and orientation. The sound is often overwhelming, drowning out smaller, real-world noises. This is an induced, collective trance state, making the audience profoundly susceptible to suggestion. A simple cold draft, an old floorboard creaking, or a slight tremor from the street traffic can be instantly interpreted as a touch, a whisper, or a looming presence. This sensory deprivation is, in a way, a psychological vulnerability. It is why urban legends about danger in the dark spaces, the back seats of taxis, the darkest corners of parking garages, the last row of the cinema, always thrive. They are warnings against the primal fear of the unknown that lurks just outside the circle of the screen's light. This dynamic was expertly manipulated during the 1990s with the rise of the slasher film and the local horror genre, often shown in these very theaters. The audience was already primed to expect sudden violence and terrifying revelations. When a young college student named Andrea, submitting her story from a chat group, recounted feeling a suffocating pressure on her chest during a screening of a horror movie in a crowded Cubao Mall theater, she initially blamed the jump scare on screen. But when she looked down, she saw a shadow, not her own, standing directly in front of her seat, blocking the aisle for a split second before the shadow simply flattened itself onto the floor and vanished. Andrea's friends dismissed it as a trick of the light, but the sense of metallic coldness that went with the shadow stayed with her, a physical impression of dread. This blend of cinematic terror and genuine local belief makes the Filipino cinema a unique ground for fear. You do not know if the horror is on the screen or in the seat next to you. The sheer volume of these experiences suggests a cultural expression of unaddressed grief. The film centered tragedy, the old war trauma, the everyday violence in a crowded city. These are too large to be mourned individually. They are compartmentalized, pushed into the background, but they leak out in folklore and in haunting stories. The phantom audience member who sits silently in the dark is perhaps the soul who died too soon and simply wants to finish the show. The figure who disappears into the wall is the soul whose death was sudden and meaningless, unable to accept the final curtain call of their life. And the widespread panic over the infected needle? It was the soul of the city collectively screaming its fear of a slow, anonymous, and terrifying death. Submit your stories to our email, storiesphpodcast@gmail.com. Find show notes and support options in the description. Access exclusive content on Patreon. Follow us on social media for daily folklore facts. So, next time you step into a cinema, before the lights dim, ask yourself, are you sure the only stories you will carry home are the ones on the screen? Or will the darkness follow you back into the world outside? As the poet once said, ghosts are memory, fear is imagination, but darkness is real. Make sure to listen to other Stories Philippines podcast episodes, past and future. Do not forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share this podcast. Support the podcast financially in ways you can find in the show notes. Thank you, and goodbye.